Hi, and welcome back to Resurrecting Shorty, the ongoing restoration of a 1965 Series IIA short wheelbase Land Rover. In the last video, we did all of the work required to the passenger side rear chassis rail, fully rebuilding all four sides of it and reinstating all of the brackets. So if you've been watching the video so far, you'll have seen me replace the chassis rail on this side and this side up to this point. You may have been wondering why I haven't carried on and repaired anything beyond that line in the actual crossmember itself, or this section of the chassis. If you know old Land Rovers or you've done one yourself, then you almost certainly have guessed why, and I'll show you now. So did you guess correctly? This is a brand new galvanised chassis crossmember, and it will sleeve on to the repaired sections that I've done. Now if you know anything about welding, you may know that welding galvanised steel generally isn't recommended. The fumes that it gives off when you do so are really quite nasty. However, I'm going to do the welding somewhere well ventilated, i.e. outside. I'm going to wear a fume mask, and I'm going to make sure that I grind off the actual galvanised coating a good distance away from any of the welds that I'm going to be doing. So I'm happy that it's going to be safe enough to do. So you may be wondering, why have I opted for a galvanised rear crossmember rather than the standard one which just comes painted? The reason is that I want this to last for a good few years, this chassis. Once I've done all this work to it, I'm hoping that I'll get at least 5 years out of it. So with that in mind, this doesn't cost much more than a standard painted one being galvanised. So I figured it was worth the extra outlay to have the galvanised version. And then I know that this, which is the most awkward area of the chassis, if I had to do any work to it, it's the most awkward one to repair properly and cut the rot out of and then replace things. It's also the area that takes the most strain if you ever do any towing. So I wanted to make sure that this was a good, strong part. Why haven't I just put a galvanised chassis on this truck? I can't afford to, is the simple answer. It's about £2 for a new galvanised chassis. I'm not particularly worried about losing the originality by getting rid of this one. This is the original chassis, but only part of it. Since I've owned it, it's had all of the outriggers replaced, the rear crossmember's been replaced once, both front dumb irons have been replaced, and it's had numerous patches on the main chassis rails. So at least probably 60% of this chassis, possibly even more, isn't original anyway. So it's hard to argue that it would make any difference if I put a new one underneath it. I'm expecting I probably will put a new one underneath it when this one completely dies. The next time that this needs significant amounts of work doing, I hope that by that point I'll be able to just put a new chassis underneath it, and then I'll never need to worry about it being rusty again. But in the meantime, just to get it back on the road now and do the best job that I can, and hopefully make it last 5, maybe more years, so I get the extra use out of it. That's all I'm looking for at the moment. Before the new rear crossmember is ready to actually fit to the truck, there's a little bit of prep work to do to it. And one of the things is to remove these metallastic bushes which have been pre-fitted to the new crossmember. I've got 2-part polyurethane bushes fitted in Shorty at the moment, and that's what I'm going to stick with. So these ones need to come out. So I've got some threaded bar and some nuts, a piece of box section, a socket and a lump of scrap metal. So the idea is to assemble this something like that. Push that onto there. Fit the socket and then wind this nut on. Now obviously I could cut this piece of threaded rod down so that I don't have to wind it quite so far, but to be honest, it might be useful one day being the length it is, and I don't want to come to use it and then find that I've cut it in half. I've now wound the whole of the socket inside the little chassis bit there, so I need another socket on there to give me a bit of extra length. You can see there that I have pushed the new bush part way out. So I'll add another socket onto the end, wind this nut back on. I've just thought of a quicker way. That was faster. So that's that chassis bush out. So another preparation job that I want to do to this Crossmember before it's ready for fitting is to pre-drill the holes for the mountings for the rear mud flaps, because it's much easier to do it at this height and upside down than it is to do it laying on my back under the truck once this is welded to it. So to start with, I need to mark out where I want these. I'm going to try and get them even both sides. And I'll line up the edge of the rubber with the end of the Crossmember. So with that clamped into position, I'll dot punch where the centres of the holes are. And take the clamps off. Move the mud flap out of the way. And move up a drill size or two. So I've drilled these to suit an M6 nut and bolt, which is slightly bigger than was actually in there originally. I think they might have been M5s before. You can see that I might need a slightly longer bolt when I come to actually fit them. But the holes are there, ready and waiting now. which is much easier to do when it's not actually fitted to the truck. You see the same thing to the other side, and then that's that job sorted. So the last bit of prep work that I want to do to this crossmember before it's ready to actually go onto the chassis is going to be just to get these ends ready for welding. So I've already opened this side up, but I'm going to pull these out like this so it's slightly more flared, because that's going to make it easier to sleeve it onto the projecting pieces of chassis when I come to put it on. I'm also going to grind off the galvanising for as much as I can actually off of these tabs completely, because as I've already said, it's not nice stuff to weld and you don't want the fumes. So as much of the galv as I can get rid of as possible. I'm also thinking, at the moment, if I put this on the way that they've intended me to, I would weld obviously around all 4 of these edges to the chassis, and that will give me one weld which is all the way around at one point. I then weld in this seam onto the corner of the box section of the chassis that's there, and obviously that gives me a long section of weld, hopefully through and connecting and penetrating into that piece that's underneath. So I get that in 4 places, but what I'm thinking is that I'd like to increase that. So what I think I'm going to do is I think I'm going to cut a slot in the middle of this, maybe not all the way down, but part of the way down to about here somewhere, a couple of inches or so. Cut a little slot in there wide enough to weld it, like a little finger. Weld that. I think I'll probably do the same thing at least once, if not twice, on the sides. So you've got, that'll just increase the amount of weld that I'm actually getting onto the piece underneath, and give me the best anchorage of this part onto the original. Well, it's not the original because I've replaced it all, but onto the main chassis as possible, which is what I want. So let's get the grinder out and clean off this, and then cut some little channels, and then I think this will be pretty much ready to fit. So if you've been following a lot, you may have wondered why I didn't go any further and fix the issues actually on the Crossmember. What's a Crossmember? Let's try that again. So if you've been watching these videos thus far, it's not 1867, that welding galvanised steel is really nasty because it gives off some really very harmful This is a brand new galvanised chassis out on the inside. Everywhere that I can feel the inside of it, it's got I don't really like that. So I want it to be good, I want it to be strong. Damn it. This is the most awkward area of a chassis to get to repair because of the angles, the shape of it. There's a lot of parts. There's a lot of parts to it. There's not really that many parts to it. Damn it, I don't know what I'm trying to say. But it's quite rusty inside. Any hole that you care to put your finger through, that sounds really dirty. That's about it for this video. Thanks ever so much for watching. And if you've enjoyed the video, please hit like and please hit subscribe because it really helps the channel. If you've got any comments or questions, leave them down below. Cheers!